be recording. And this horse is named Hercules. He looks a lot like Rafalco, all chestnut with a white blaze on his face, but he's a quarter horse instead of a warm blood. And he has 3 white socks instead of 2 white socks. That's how most people tell the difference initially, till you get to know him. So Hercules is not one of my horses, but he lives at my barn and stays in training. This horse was probably my greatest nemesis, and he was pretty difficult. He's been a difficult horse to train. Initially, he got labeled as having a lot of behavioral issues. When the owner first got him as a youngster, he wouldn't take the bit, he wouldn't turn right under saddle or in groundwork, pull the rope, lead rope or lunge line out of people's hands all the time, kick, bite, strike, all kinds of interesting behaviors. So I worked with him for a while, and the fact that Hercules couldn't turn right and would not go forward, he was halting all the time. No matter how much I used my legs or the whip, he just would barely walk forward. So for Hercules, this is kind of a forward-going rhythmic walk that took a while to achieve. And I worked him primarily in this exercise over the years with different variations, because Hercules had some significant health issues that nobody knew about. It even took working with him about a year before I had a vet who started to help me with diagnostics. I had 3 different vets tell me, oh, he's just a butthead. He basically was the Bart Simpson of the barn. And everybody kept labeling it as behavior. But he's actually a great example. As I started unraveling all of his physical issues, they were complicated, and they probably started for him between the age of 1 and 2. So as a 3-year-old, he was sent out for training, 90 days or whatever, and then he was sold to my client when he was still pretty young, maybe 4 years old. And he's now in his teens, and over the years, one of the first things we discovered, and it wasn't until he was about 5 or 6 years old, was that he was a big horse. He was over 16 hands as a youngster. He grew very fast, and his barn name has always been Hercules, even though that's not his registered name. And if you know anything about quarter horses, he's impressive on both sides. He's double HYPP negative, and ironically, the only food this horse can eat is alfalfa. If you know anything about that quarter horse line, that's pretty shocking. So the first thing we discovered was on Hercules' stifles, he had a condition that's called OCD lesions, not obsessive compulsive disorder. It basically stands for osteocon something dis something. I can't remember the whole name of it. But an OCD lesion is basically caused when horses grow really fast, from foal to 3 or 4 years old. And when they grow fast, you can get a tear in the cartilage in any of the joints. And that tear the cartilage will move. It'll create like a flap sometimes where you have an intermittent bone-on-bone pain. And Hercules had these lesions on the weight-bearing condyles of both stifles. So it was no wonder he did not want to move forward. He was not comfortable. And by the time we figured it out with x-rays, instead of doing surgery, which is one way you can deal with OCD lesions, shave off the cartilage, help it heal, we opted for injections, which were just going to promote self-healing without doing the surgery. Because the worst one, which was on the right hind leg, that one had already healed on its own almost 50% of the way by the time we found it. So when we did the joint injections, they said 6 months he'll be good to go. But we also had discovered he was already developing hock arthritis at that young age. And he was already developing some ring bone on the left front leg, basically because every step he took, he might have a severe painful moment. And so he learned how to move, really protecting and avoiding using both hind legs, but the right hind leg in particular. And so what that did to his spine was it set up a twist or a rotation with the dorsal side of the spine, or the top side of the spinous processes, sort of oriented to the left. So that created restriction to the use of the right hind, an unlevel pelvis that was sort of higher on the right than the left, always tilted a bit left. And when I would sit on him, no matter how level I had the saddle and how tight I had the girth, he always felt an inch or two significantly higher on the right side of the saddle compared to the left. And that's what we feel when the spine twists. So sometimes that twisting action of the spine or rotation can go back and forth equally and quickly. That's called hyperrotation. It can basically go to the outside of a turn. So if a horse is turning right and the dorsal tips of the spine go left, that's called inverted rotation, which is normal. It's how a lot of young horses start working on circles. Or in Hercules' case, he had a fixed rotation with the dorsal tips of the spine left. So his whole spine was sort of twisted to the left and stuck there, whether he tracked straight or left or right. So that's going to contract and really tighten the muscles along the right side of the hindquarter, all around the right hind leg, the entire right side of his back, and the entire right side of his neck. So both shoulders were incredibly tight because it was difficult to get him to engage his hindquarters enough to get him off the forehand. The tightness through the shoulders is really kind of the last part, and through his neck is just the last part that we're still working out a little bit. But the twist through the spine has mostly been remedied, but man, was it tough. And when we injected the stifles, thinking that was the last of our problems, we x-rayed again at 6 months, and the OCD lesion hadn't healed very much. We waited another 6 months and kept him on pain meds. It still hadn't healed where it should have. By 18 months, we said something's wrong with this horse. And so then the same vet helped basically take blood, take samples, try to figure out what else might be going on. And that's when we discovered, through just a basic blood test panel, allergy panel, that this poor guy was allergic to almost all known horse foods. So he's allergic to corn, wheat, soy, molasses, barley. He's allergic to flax. He's allergic to timothy hay. He just has a million food allergies. And so we had to change his diet. Finally got the OCD lesion on both stifles to heal completely. And he still, to this day, has to remain on a very special diet, or his allergy response creates inflammation in his joints, and he gets very uncomfortable and won't move forward, right? And as kind of an impressive line of quarter horses, he has a tendency to put on a lot of muscle, and it gets tight fast. If he is not comfortable in the coordination of his skeleton, he gets pretty muscularly tight, and the forward is like pushing a rock up a hill. So where he's at now is going to the right, putting the right hind leg on the inside is now his easier direction. I work him in a snaffle bit, although I did quite a bit of work in the halter. And that pushing on the bit is actually, and when he's going, lengthening the neck and then going back into a little bit of extension, has more to do with him trying to loosen up his chronic tightness on both shoulders, change the placement of both front legs, and finally let his whole neck find length and suppleness. So it was quite difficult because without proper use of the hindquarters, the shoulders and neck can never fully become supple because the body has to be stable. Stability is a higher priority than even comfort. So because his hindquarter was so painfully dysfunctional, he just learned to stabilize on his front legs, shoulders, and by tightening the neck. And this horse could be so heavy, he could run through any bridle you could put on him if he put a mind to it. So I really had to work with him to prove that little by little, keeping the threshold of challenge doable, right? If I asked for too much change too soon, he would get defensive and revolt. So the changes had to come gradually. I can get him to trot and canter. It's much better now, but even trying to get him to take more than 2 strides of trot was quite difficult when the hindquarter was really healing and he was learning to use it. So now he's finally in the bridle. I'm also working him under saddle, and I do more groundwork with him than riding because he's the opposite of Rafalco. Rafalco, the other chestnut, always did better in gaining changes to his balance if I rode him, and on the ground it took him a long time to be able to control himself. With Hercules, I always made more progress untwisting his chronic dorsal tip left twist that not only went through, made the pelvis unlevel, it made the back very unlevel. He actually took it all the way up through his neck. And I didn't really realize that the twist went all the way through his neck until much, much later. And I noticed it when I would go to the right and when I would do lateral work with him on a right bend. As soon as I would place his pole to the right, he would tilt that pole over to the left. So his way of avoiding a right lateral bend, because it was painful and uncomfortable, was to rotate his neck left, which is pretty creative and pretty complicated to unwind. So we've even unwound the twist through his neck. And now when I work with him on the long reins, it's because it's easier for him to lengthen his neck, use his hindquarters, relax his back, and keep working towards, oh, and we always get 2 poops and a pee, so here comes the pee. So because he grew up basically protecting his hindquarters, especially the right hind leg, and he went through training, he was just super slow to learn in training. And it would be easy to say he was naughty, he was stubborn, he was obstinate, he was stupid, he got called all of those things, lazy. And really it was a multitude of health issues that were creating significant discomfort to the point of pain. And the worst thing he would really do under saddle, if he got scared, he would take off and he would buck and you were on for the ride because there was no stopping him. But most of the time, he just sort of refused to move forward. Or if he did move forward, it was about half the speed you see him going now. And after unraveling all of these health issues in a young horse, no less, so a lot of that was just congenital issues that he was born with. And because he grew up protecting himself from people, protecting his body from pain, his progress has been really slow, and I've had to prove to him every step of the way that if you work through these little bits of struggle and discomfort, you will feel better on the other side. And it's horses like Hercules that have really forced me to look closer at the mechanics, to look closer at my training strategies, to be patient and understanding and not judge the horse's behavior as coming for no reason. This horse actually is a really kind, sweet, generous horse. The fact that he didn't try to kill his owner or me before we found out about all of his internal discomfort really made my heart open more to this horse. And we just patiently work through his issues from back to front. And right there in that posture, as he lengthens the neck, and it's not as sideways as we saw with Rafalco, but he's on this exercise for sort of the same reason. It's still hard for him to adduct and abduct the front legs, but he's much more comfortable and stable with his hindquarter engagement. It's easier for him without a rider than it is with a rider. So I probably do 2-to-1 ground sessions to ride time. But he's down to kind of working out the last of it. And even his front feet used to be two different shapes. The left front foot that has the white sock was so upright it looked like a club foot. And the right front foot that's dark without this white sock was so pancaked and flat it looked like it belonged on a different horse. And as we've gotten the spine to untwist, we've changed the muscle use basically in every muscle of his body back to front, and it's finally to where he's pretty comfortable letting go through the shoulders and neck, even though he has his moments. His feet have also never looked more the same size up front than they do right now. So we never changed that through shoeing. The, sort of high-low syndrome, they call it, with two different shaped foot, one upright and one pancake, is really because if a horse has a chronic twist through the spine, they're always going to be sort of overloading one foot and pulling up on the opposite on the opposite side. So that's how you get one hoof that's sort of upright and one hoof that's kind of pancaked. Oops, I wasn't watching my watch. So that's about 30 minutes this direction. And you can see the more length he finds through his neck, he slows down a little bit, but slow is still forward. And when this horse had no forward, I actually had to begin the long reins from behind him and carry a whip, which is not something I normally do with the long reins, just to get him back into walk, because he would halt like every 4 or 5 strides. He just could not maintain a walk, right? And then the same went on with trot and canter, and now he's actually getting pretty good at maintaining the trot. Not so much under saddle, that's a work in progress, but at least on the ground, we'll look at him trotting. But this exercise has helped him tremendously, slowly untwist that chronic use of the spine, level off his hindquarters, learn that he can engage his hindquarters without pain. And even to this day, not only is he on a special diet, but he's on monthly allergy shots just to manage more of the issues with flies, mosquitoes, bugs that we have in Florida. Will make him break out in hives to the point that he's just raw and itchy all the time. So graduating to the bridle, the only reason I don't use the bridle on Rafalco is because it can still trigger the overcurling of his neck. Hercules would never allow his neck to be overcurled. He would just blast through any amount of rain pressure you could dish out, he could blow through. So his shortening of the neck is more upward, like Prima was showing. But if you also look at his neck, it looks slightly too short for his body. He looks like he has this long back and short neck. And a lot of people will say that that's a confirmation point. It's actually his chronic shortening and tightening as a way to protect himself. When I work him on the long reins like this, and when I ride, that's the last area of his body that needs to release chronic habits of tightening and tension. So without changing his posture, that really developed as a protective mechanism because he was literally in pain in his hindquarters and twisted through his back, that pattern in the nervous system for his coordination of movement won't change without guidance. That's what he learned, that's what he did, and he had his reasons for doing it. So he was hard to ride, he was hard to manage, and he had no desire to move forward. So that stretch of the neck with the gaping of the mouth is actually a really happy sign when I'm working with Hercules on the long reins. That's him giving himself a stretch, and you can see he halted or he slows down as he learns to finally release those patterns of tension. So when he's not working, his change of, I want to say this, the pattern of movement lives in the nervous system. So until we change the habit of movement, which is why we're looking for postural development, right? Until we change the habit of movement, every time he's not working or not supported, he retightens his neck, his shoulders, his oblique muscles, all of that. So he has to stay in work in order to completely learn a new way of organizing his body. And we had a lot of pain issues that we had to gently work through in that process, as well as treat medically. We had to do both. So, of course, we worked with the vet and did everything we could for pain management, for allergy management. But even after all those treatments and body work and a great farrier, the habit of his coordination was deeply ingrained in his nervous system because it probably started when he was very young. So Hercules is one of those horses that was really a challenge for me as a trainer. Always makes me feel like a failure because his progress was so slow. And yet, if he would go off to another trainer, which he did a couple of times, the owners live out of state and he was supposed to go back and forth between two states. Now he just kind of lives with me. Every other trainer, it was like starting over again. Oh, he's just lazy. Oh, he's just being naughty. Oh, he's just a butthead. Oh, there's nothing wrong with him. He just doesn't want to obey. And that can lead to some pretty harsh tactics with not understanding that there could be an unknown lurking pain issue that's driving that resistance, driving what we call lazy, causing the horse to protect themselves more when we treat them harshly or use more leverage or use gadgets or try to make them fit into a frame for what we want to do. So when I work with people's horses, Hercules is often in my mind, and I'm really pleased to show him as part of my barn because I feel like we've worked through all of the physical issues, all of the old patterning of movement, almost 100% of the way. There's still residual patterns, behaviors, frustrations between him and me, where it's a work in progress. But he has turned into one of the kindest, sweetest, most reliable horses in the barn, and always does his best. Because little by little, by understanding the mechanics and understanding how we had to go about getting the changes that we needed without blowing him up or forcing him into something that made him worse, he's really to trust that when he's worked, instead of work causing pain, which was what he used to think, the work actually helps him find more comfort. So he'll still test me once in a while. He still does his Hercules playlist of shenanigans. But for the most part, I have to say, this horse really tries. And the neck is a delicate last piece of the puzzle. So like there, when he gapes the mouth, stretches the neck, I'll loosen up the reins quite a bit and just let him play with that. If he gets a little distracted, if he gets a little tight, then I give him a bit of a firmer aid to get him back on track. And so I'm going to finish up working with him. I hope the lighting isn't too terrible, end of the day. But this is Hercules. So I hope you enjoy following him as well.